Welcome back to Leading Digital Transformation. In part 2, I'll talk in more depth about the building blocks that an organization needs to put in place to make digital transformation successful, and how Disney used those building blocks to transform the theme park experience. I'll draw on a framework for digital transformation that was developed by researchers at MIT. It's described in detail in the book on the slide, but you can also read a summary of the contents at the link shown here, which I've also included in the suggested readings for this short course. The book focuses on digital business design, which the authors describe as the organizational configuration of people, processes, and technology to create value propositions using digital technologies. In other words, it's about the capabilities you need to put in place to deliver on the digital strategy ideas that you came up with, as we talked about in the first part. The 5 building blocks described by the MIT team provide a way to think about evolving your company to rapidly deliver innovative digital offerings. The first, shared, and I won't go necessarily in the order on the slide, the shared customer insights are the fundamental insights about how to configure your employees or people, processes, and technology to ultimately learn what customers want. The next I'm going to talk about is the accountability framework. That's about how do we ensure that individuals and teams within the organization own the success and evolution of digital offerings to customers or even internal business stakeholders. Then I'll go into the operational backbone. The operational backbone is about how do we improve and ensure the core business processes and systems and make sure that they're stable, reliable, and efficient so they properly support the operation, not just of the current business, but of the new digital businesses. Then I'll go into the discussion around the digital platform, which, as I mentioned before, isn't really about technology, but it's about how do you leverage components, both technical and business and people, to rapidly build and configure digital offerings. And finally, we'll touch on the external developer platform, which is how, even though that sounds technical as well, it's about how do you engage with external third parties? How do you engage with partners to expand the digital offerings faster than you can do with your own internal teams? So in order to talk a little bit about the shared customer insights, I'm again going to bring in the Disney example. We mentioned the founding 5 people who came from Disney World, who ultimately sold, with some support from people like myself, sold the concepts and got a case for change that Bob Iger and the board of directors, including Steve Jobs, bought into. And one of the ways that they did that was really via a technique called prototyping. It's by setting up a lab, which they set up in an abandoned attraction at a theme park called Epcot at Disney World, called Body Wars, just as a piece of trivia, which was basically a ride where you were once shrunk and put into a human body. But it was abandoned, and they took over that, made it into a lab that they used to demo and showcase all of the ideas they had around improving the customer experience, about removing the friction from the process, about how wearable technology, data, computing, and cast members would ultimately work together in concert to create great guest experiences that were personalized for those customers. Ultimately, they moved our lab into a bigger location, which was a soundstage at Hollywood Studios, and they had all the board, unfortunately minus Steve Jobs, who was already too ill to travel, walk through that lab. And that's what ultimately sold the $1 billion investment over 3 years in the next generation experience. The core idea was to create an electronic band, which later became known as the Magic Band, which was a piece of wearable computing technology that you wore on your wrist, and it connected the guest, not just the mum or the dad that booked the vacation, but all of the guests, including the kids, to anything they might want to do in the theme park, or in their hotel, or on the bus, or even at the airport as they fly in. They made a whole lot of different prototypes of this band. The early ones were made out of Velcro and a plastic liner they got from Home Depot, which is like a Bunnings in America. And they taped these all together and experimented and iterated through all of these concepts and took a lot of people through the lab. The idea essentially was that at the entry to the theme park, guests would tap to enter, and they'd rip out all of the turnstiles and replace them with these V-shaped entry portals. And the concept there was to get forward momentum. People weren't stopped by a gate, that they just tapped and moved forward. Of course, you might tap and you didn't have the right ticket linked into your Magic Band, in which case Mickey would light up in blue instead of green. Never had red Mickeys, because red is the color of danger and anger, and the designers wanted to keep that forward momentum going and not have stop signs. So if you had a problem, you would go to a cast member conveniently located just inside the entry area, and they would use mobile apps on a handheld device to help the guests with any entry issues. So it changed all of those jobs of those cast members at Disney World. One of the early concepts was to package up Magic Bands into some beautiful boxes and send them in advance to guests before their trip to Disney World, so that they would create anticipation and excitement amongst the family before they even came to Disney World. So the Magic Bands could also be personalized. They could have individual names written on the back of them, and as you can see them on the box here. You could also choose different colored Magic Bands, and ultimately you could choose Magic Bands representing all sorts of Disney characters, as well as all sorts of Disney properties. So here I've got a very special Magic Band, if you can see on the screen. It is a limited edition Star Wars Magic Band. This particular one is red and is based on Darth Vader. If you can see that on the small screen in front of you. If I pull it out, you can see Darth Vader on the back. And so this, I've never worn this one, but it's a very special. I've also got a Yoda one, which of course is green. And all of these types of concepts were just ways that Disney brought its franchises into the digital transformation experience, into this Magic Band program that ultimately led to more excitement, ultimately more revenue as well for Disney through this personalization concept. So on arrival at the hotel, guests could head straight to the hotel room. They didn't even have to go to the front desk to check in. We had to replace over 27,000 door locks so that they could read the custom technology in the Magic Band, which was a protocol called RFID, Radio Frequency Identity. Guests could also use their Magic Band to buy things. They could assign a PIN and use their Magic Band to pay at any point of sale at one of the stores or in the restaurants. At the front gate to one of the theme parks or water parks, guests could just tap, as I mentioned earlier, and if any problems emerged, those cast members were there to help with mobile apps, with any entry issues into the parks. As mentioned, I got involved in the NG program about a year to 2 years after the original idea was formulated, because the NGE program team, the five executives from Walt Disney World, realized they needed our experience to build the digital components and get them integrated into the Walt Disney World website with the same look and feel. We built the website and the mobile app for the experience, which was called the My Disney Experience. And the core idea was that there was an itinerary planner that included the ability to book fast passes online, allowing guests to book 3 fast pass experiences per day. All these great customer concepts, as I mentioned, were designed, prototyped, and tested in the lab, in the soundstage lab. Programmatically, in terms of the structures, NGE was set up as a separate organization with an executive vice president reporting into the chairman of the theme parks. The concept was that there was a focus on these types of agile principles. It wasn't like the NGE followed the agile methodology per se, but these principles were followed. Everybody was co-located in the lab, so it was a very collaborative, non-hierarchical environment. Everybody was fully resourced to the program. It was also very cross-functional, and there was a huge emphasis on experimentation. Those accountability principles are the same ones that many organizations use to implement digital transformation in their companies. They're based on Spotify and other companies that are pure digital that have used them, but they're now used in many non-digital kind of companies. We use them also at Optus for digital transformation. So I guess the big learning here for Disney and for you was that the separate organizational unit, which was sort of in that lab in secrecy initially, worked really well at moving fast and building working prototypes, all the concepts, and selling the concepts to the board. But what became more challenging with that separate structure was when the project and the technologies had to get integrated with the real business operation. So there were two types of problems there, two dimensions. First was there was a lot of technical challenges in integrating with all the back-end systems, and I'll talk a bit more about them later. And second big area of problems was change management on the people and culture side. In Disney World, over 70,000 employees, half of those, 35,000 employees, had some type of change in their way of working in their jobs, like carrying a tablet at the front entry to the parks. So as I mentioned earlier, I originally was the person who led all of the digital technology pieces, the website, the mobile app, built out those concepts. And there was a separate part of the organization that led the remaining parts of the technology, the actual design of the technologies in the Magic Band, in all of those touch points, whether the hotel rooms and the theme park entry portals, and how did all the data come together. That was led by a separate leader. But in 2013, the program started to run into all of those technical integration problems that I mentioned, and I was asked to lead the end-to-end technology. And so one of the things I noticed was that the teams weren't really working well across the organizational boundaries. So the accountability framework basically needed to mature. And we needed to connect the team leaders together on a daily basis to work through certain urgent operational integration issues and all of the dependencies across the components and systems. So we introduced a Scrum of Scrums concept, which is coming out of an Agile framework, which is summarized here on this slide, where individual teams down at the sprint process meet daily, work within their teams of 10 or 12 people, deliver code into production rapidly. Then they need to work in the context of a broader part of the product, and then overall in context of the broader program. So this added the connection points across all of the teams and the urgent prioritization of those integration challenges. So we essentially added a bit of hierarchy, added a bit of schedule release structures as needed to coordinate better across the myriad of different people involved. So there was a lot that happened in those few years at Disney, and a lot of learnings that we had around the building blocks of digital transformation. In particular, I dived into shared customer insights and accountabilities in part 2 of this module. In the next part, the final part, I'll wrap up covering the remaining 3 building blocks that you can use to help lead digital transformations in your organization. Finally, leading you with this fun cartoon to reflect on the issues with change in organizations. Thanks.